Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome. I am Congresswoman Kendra Horn. I represent Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District, and I'm so glad to be moderating this Blue Dog Coalition Roundtable this morning on rural education and workforce development. We have a great panel, and this conversation is part of a series that is aiming to discuss key topics with policy experts so that Blue Dog Coalition can continue to develop a forward-looking plan to strengthen rural and tribal communities across the country. We know that rural and tribal communities are and have the potential to be the home of innovative manufacturing hubs and thriving small businesses, but we also have to start by building a strong economic and educational foundation for them. Today, we're going to discuss one of the pillars of that plan, rural education and workforce training. And as a representative of a district that contains both rural and urban elements, this topic really hits close to home. And as someone who grew up in a rural area and lives in an urban area, I know the importance of investing in both. And in the era of COVID-19, the truth is that our rural students have been impacted in many significant ways, especially where they can't always get the same access to their classrooms or digital assets, and they're losing out on opportunities in their education. But what we know is that the pandemic didn't create this. It just accentuated it and highlighted it. And I think this is an incredible opportunity for us to talk about the underlying challenges, but also the opportunities and how we thoughtfully approach addressing these issues. For example, in my home state here in Oklahoma, we have faced and continue to face low school funding levels and challenges with teacher retention, school district consolidation, and the absence of a rural robust infrastructure for rural broadband. And those are just part of the challenges. But I think that there's also something that this pandemic has raised that will be interesting to see how we address it. And that is, what is the combination of digital assets and resources and in-person needs, and how do we use the two together to meet the needs and challenges of 21st century education? Because the quality of any child's education should not be based on zip code, and improving schools is really a key to long-term development of rural communities. Meanwhile, beyond K-12 education, we also have to make further investments in higher education and career and technical training for our rural areas, because the cost of higher education has increased over 25% in the last decade alone. So the answer to this issue can't just be free college. We have to support and strengthen the diversity of post-K-12 education opportunities, from community colleges to career and technical institutions. We have to have robust opportunities and create pathways that our students and adults going back for retraining can follow. And on that note, I'm incredibly proud of Oklahoma's outstanding career tech system that is made targeted investments so that everyone from students leaving high school and younger to adults returning to the classroom have strong options for their career paths. And I'm equally proud of the community colleges in my state and district who have long provided affordable college education. And to talk about these issues, spanning the gamut of education from K-12 to higher education today, today's guests are Dr. Monty Randall, Secretary of Education and Training for the Muskogee Creek Nation, and Dean of Academic Affairs at the College of the Muskogee Nation, Dr. Alissa Young, President of Hopkinsville Community College, Dr. Alan Pratt, Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association, and Tamara Hiler, the Director of Education at Third Way. And I'm very excited to have you all with us today. And with that, I will start with Dr. Young for an introduction. Welcome, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you so very much, and good morning, Representative Horn. I am Alissa Young, President of Hopkinsville Community College, as you have stated, located in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where agriculture is a huge industry here. My college enrolls slightly more than 2,500 students each year. Our largest extended campus site is located at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is one of our largest military bases. Our full year tuition and fees for in-state students is approximately $4,500. I'm honored to be here today to speak about rural community colleges. And if you will allow, I'd like to make a few brief points about these essential entities. There are 270 rural community colleges in the United States, more than one out of every four of these institutions. They enroll close to 270,000 students each year, about 1/10 of all community college students. Rural community colleges are usually small in size, often with fewer than 2,000 students. From the national perspective, and I can speak personally, sometimes we feel overlooked. We're generally extremely underfunded, especially for the role we play in our communities. Rural communities depend on community colleges to serve as educational, cultural, community, and recreational hubs. These are the oases in what are often educational and cultural deserts. Rural colleges can serve as catalysts for economic vitality and development, providing talent pipelines through business partnerships, often serve as business incubators, helping new and small businesses succeed. Rural colleges focus on students who experience food, transportation, housing, broadband, healthcare, and childcare insecurities. We offer career and wellness counseling, financial literacy, and personal finance training, assisting with accessing government resources and ensuring students have internet access. In 2015, only 28% of those living in rural areas held an associate or bachelor's degree. In urban areas, that percentage is more like 41. Of note is the fact that in rural areas, women are far more likely to be college educated than men. At Hopkinsville Community College, our enrollment is 70% women. Rural counties with higher levels of educational attainment generally have better economic prospects, including lower poverty and unemployment and underemployment rates. Rural community colleges and their students need federal support in a variety of areas, including broadband, economic development, job training, and, as always, student financial assistance. Their lean staffing makes it hard to compete with better resourced institutions. So we feel it is critical for the federal government to explicitly target assistance in these essential colleges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Young. And our next guest on this panel for opening remarks is Dr. Randall of the Muskogee Creek Nation and the College of Muskogee. Dr. Randall, welcome. We're glad to have you with us and looking forward to your opening remarks.
Hello, Ishjay Monty Randall, Choho Jifkidos, Talladega, Amidowat, Ijoogi, Dowes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Monty Randall, and I'm Muskogee Creek. I'm from Talladega tribal town, and I'm part of the Deer Clan. So that was a bit of a traditional greeting to everybody, introducing myself in my Muskogee language. So yes, and so just kind of a quick update. First of all, I'm with the Muskogee Creek Nation, and so my current position is Secretary of Education and Training with the Muskogee Creek Nation. So formally with the College of the Muskogee Nation as Dean of Academic Affairs. And so, but as I speak on, and represent the College of the Muskogee Nation, I still work there as an adjunct instructor and teach tribal government. So still very much connected to the College of the Muskogee Nation. And, just to give a kind of a quick overview of the college and our demographic and population. So we were established in 2004, and we actually started with 2 classes and 28 students. And so primarily those classes were Muskogee language and Muskogee culture. So, and primarily for employees of the nation. And, so we started it in 2004. We partnered with the Oklahoma State University Institute of Technology. So we went kind of utilized their accreditation and their services. They actually were a great partner for us when we initially started. We were on their campus, and they allowed us to have some classroom space. And we actually renovated several offices and classrooms and created student services for our students who were on the campus at that time. So we developed over the years, and whenever I came on board as a full-time instructor in tribal services, we were going through the accreditation process, and we were just starting that with the Higher Learning Commission in 2010. So we progressed and established our own campus in Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and that's where our Muskogee Creek Nation capital is located as well, in Okmulgee. So we were running typically about 150 students at the time, from whenever I was there, 2010, through our accreditation. And we were initially received our initial accreditation in 2016 from the Higher Learning Commission, and still offering about 60 to 70 classes. So we offer four associate degree programs, and since then we've transitioned into added two more. So we have a tribal services, Native American studies, gaming, criminal justice, natural resources, and a general studies associate degrees right now. And then we have two certificate programs, one in Muskogee language and one in gaming as well. So that's with the gaming industry. So still about 150 to 200 students, and run about 70 classes right now. So, of course, we're all online right now since about March of this year during the pandemic. So it's been a struggle, and that's probably one of our greatest challenges is for a rural community college such as ourselves, is having that accessibility to internet, having services. So even our students, our students who are taking our classes online in rural communities, having accessibility to broadband and being able to access the classes and the lessons. So we utilize the Desire to Learn platform, and it's challenging for some of our faculty as well. It's just as challenging for them to connect. Part of our strength of our tribal college is our culture, our language, and our culture. So we have excelled on engagement, student engagement, faculty engaging with our students. So we've being online has been a tremendous challenge to everybody, to faculty, staff, and students. So we just recently finished up our reaffirmation site visit with the Higher Learning Commission. So we're anticipating some good news to move into a 10-year accreditation cycle, and then looking forward to continuing the process to move our programs into a bachelor's degree program. So continuing to grow. We're sitting on about 40 acres of classrooms, buildings, and just continuing to grow. So I appreciate this opportunity, and just look forward to engaging with everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randall. It's great to have you here, and thank you for all that you're doing. Really incredibly glad to have the perspective of tribal education on this panel. And now turning to K-12 education and rural education, turning it over for a few moments to Dr. Pratt, who's Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association, for some opening remarks. Dr. Pratt?
Thank you, Congresswoman Horn and the Blue Dog Coalition, for the invitation, and it's really humbling, and it's an honor for us to be represented on the panel today, or the roundtable. I will echo the comments by the first two panelists or guests that the fact that we always look for ways that we feel like that NREA can work with others and work with other organizations from the federal government to regional and local to find a way to help rural communities in general. So for us, it's an opportunity to share some of our work, but it's an opportunity to learn and discover others and what they're doing and how we can connect practices from all across the country to help all rural schools and communities. Our organization was founded in 1907, and I'm entering into my 5th year as executive director. We are located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, on the campus of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. If you're probably over my shoulder, you'll see a large C. That is the Chattanooga C, and I have to represent when I'm in my office and doing a video conference call. We have members in all 50 states. We have 42 state affiliates covering a wide variety of states and a wide variety of rural and diverse sections of rural. We pull from K-12, higher ed, and then community development as part of our membership. And our work prior to COVID was around connecting broadband rural community connection, teacher shortage, teacher issues, and also funding and community development. So during COVID and now, obviously, those have been highlighted and put to the forefront. So a lot of our work's been around the broadband and the coalition of connecting resources to help our rural schools, but also around the teacher shortages and the potential teacher shortages we're going to see coming out of COVID. A lot of the other aspects that we've been working on is the I Am a Rural Teacher campaign and project that is a partnership between Rural Schools Collaborative and is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. We started prior to COVID telling stories of what it means to be a rural teacher and how important rural teachers are to our schools and communities. And it's really morphed into telling rural stories about how teachers adapted and became really innovative during this process and how school communities have as well. And then now we're looking at what we call cultivating communities, which is telling stories of communities and what makes communities special and how the communities came together to make an impact on the schools and as the schools made an impact on the community. We strongly believe that there's a great tie between K-12 to jobs, but also with the community colleges and the trade school training and also four-year schools. So we feel like that the regional approach and the public partnerships and private partnerships that can form through the work that we're doing and the work that can really be incentivized by the federal government can help move us forward and create these cooperative environments that we feel like we can make rural schools and communities stronger and also have a workforce pipeline. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you and for allowing us to tell the story of NREA.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pratt. Appreciate that and all you do for rural K-12 education. And our final panelist today is Tamara Hiler, Director of Education at Third Way. Looking forward to hearing from you and thank you for being with us.
Yes, hi, thank you and good morning to everyone. It's such an honor to be here and to learn from everyone else on this panel as well. My name is Tamara Hiler and I'm the Director of Education at Third Way, which is a centrist think tank that's located here in Washington, D.C. That really works to help craft both federal policy and we also do a lot of public opinion research to better understand the public opinion on a lot of issues, including education. And so I've been at Third Way now for almost 7 years. And while some of our work has touched on K-12 education in the past, including being very involved in the passage of ESSA and helping to maintain some critical testing and accountability provisions through that bill to ensure that all students, including rural students, remain visible in the data that we have around education. Over the last 4 years or so, our focus in education has been exclusively in the higher education and workforce development space, and in particular, trying to make sure that the conversations that we're having about higher education and post-secondary education isn't, to your point, Representative Horn, only focused on free college or some of these other bumper stickers we hear a lot about in the news, but really thinking first and foremost how we can center these conversations on value and student outcomes for all students. So with that in mind, I know as many have already alluded to in this conversation, we know rural communities are rich and diverse communities with a lot to offer. However, unfortunately, we know that there are opportunity gaps that exist for rural students today. We know in our work, for example, we talk a lot about sort of the leaky pipeline that we have in our education system. And unfortunately, we know just how leaky that pipeline can be for rural students themselves. So today we know that the high school graduation rate for rural students stands at around 87%. However, when it comes to those high school graduates actually enrolling in some sort of post-secondary education, we see that only 60% of rural students enter college of any kind, which is lower than their suburban and urban counterparts who enroll around the 70% range. And even worse, what we see is that for those students who do start college, unfortunately, only 42% of rural students complete. So as a result, what we're seeing is that there are fewer rural students that have college degrees or are in that sort of worst case scenario. There's about 1 in 5 rural students who are classified in the some college, no degree bucket, which actually means that they may have taken on some form of student debt to attend college in the first place, but didn't graduate and don't have the skills that they need to ultimately pay that debt back and could increase their chances of defaulting on their loans. So when we're also looking at the workforce development side, we know that rural students also may be less likely to have access to or complete an apprenticeship or other high quality workforce training program opportunities, just given some of the funding inequities that exist in our system. So I know, as many have noted, and I'm sure this is the kind of thing that we'll get into in this conversation today, but there are several factors that account for these disparities, including things like just the lack of recruitment from colleges and other institutions and workforce development programs in rural communities. As Dr. Young alluded to, the reality of just the sheer geography of rural students and the fact that there are what we call education deserts out there, where even for rural students who may have access to only 1 or 2 post-secondary options, given funding inequities, they may not be as high quality or have the same opportunities available to some of their suburban or urban counterparts. And as has already been mentioned over and over again, I think especially given the context with COVID, is just the reality that online education, in particular, the role and the opportunity that online education can play for rural students to help fill that void, but also some of the real concerns that we have when it comes to knowing that there are predatory actors out there or other institutions that may be using online education and are charging a lot of money, yet we don't necessarily have clear or consistent definitions for what quality online learning is, and some of the concerns that can lead for rural students who may end up paying a lot of money for an online education but getting little to no value in return. So also one more thing, just on the apprenticeship and workforce development piece, we know that there, just simply having fewer employers in certain rural communities can actually limit the options that students may have to apprentice with. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to think through, as others have mentioned, just increasing economic development in a lot of these rural communities to make sure that there are additional workforce training programs available. So the good news is, though, is that I think that there are a lot of ways that Congress can address some of these disparities. And in some ways, given the COVID situation right now, there's actually opportunity. There's more money being invested in this system through the first stimulus package, hopefully additional stimulus packages to come, and giving us opportunities to really rethink the way that we're delivering education and some of these workforce training programs in the future. So I really look forward to having this discussion with all of you today and learning from you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm very excited because all 4 of you have such important and unique perspectives about how we address the total of education, which of course spans a lifetime. So it's a big subject that we're tackling here, but one that is critically important. And Tamara, I think you made a very good point about the need to look at apprenticeships and other opportunities for economic opportunity and development when we're talking about jobs in rural communities. And given that this is such a broad topic, what I thought I'd do with questions is start sort of K-12 and work our way up, and then we can talk about some of those intersections just to give us a little bit of a roadmap here. So Dr. Pratt, I'll turn to you first, and I want to address something because about rural education, especially in K-12. You've worn a lot of different hats in your life in the rural education space, working at every level of the process in the high school education system, from teacher to principal to superintendent, and now as executive director of the Rural Education Association. And what I'd really appreciate starting this off with, and you mentioned this in some of your initiatives, is your thoughts on teacher retention. It's an issue we've seen in rural areas across the country, and we know that the pandemic has now just exacerbated the shortages, and the more that we see this, the more effort that we need to put into retention and education, especially in K-12. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we tackle this? What are some of the things that Congress can do in addition to the work that the Rural Education Association is doing?
Well, you gave me a softball question, the first one. That's a good one. I think you're looking at a lot of times in a lot of rural communities, the school system is a lot of times the largest employer in the area. So we have to treat this as a workforce development issue. And what I mean by that for us and for rural schools is that, number one, you probably heard this term before, is we need to really recruit from our own, kind of grow your own, but recruit from our own ranks that are students that may be interested while they're in high school, middle school, high school, and becoming a teacher, and train those students enable them to establish a pipeline with community colleges and four-year universities to create a teacher training program that allows them to come back and do student teaching, but do work prior to leaving. So I think that's the big aspect. The other aspect is the reason we started the I'm a Rural Teacher campaign with the Rural Schools Collaborative is to simply tell the story. And the first phase of this is to show why it's important to be in rural communities, but also address and recruit teachers to rural communities that may be from suburban or urban areas, and they want a different lifestyle or a different way of life, and they look at rural schools and rural communities as an option and a viable option, because we know in looking at surveys and studies that teacher pay is very important. So I want to go ahead and say that right now. But teacher pay is not the only factor that we're seeing the teachers leaving the profession. A lot of that is in support, professional learning, but also leadership support. And we think that those are aspects that we can really do a better job and simply recruit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pratt. I appreciate that. Now, Dr. Young, I want to turn to you at the higher education level. I know we've talked about career tech and apprenticeships, and I want to address that in a moment. But I think you span both in your unique position. And my question for you is, in light of the current unemployment crisis that's facing our nation in the midst of COVID-19, we're seeing a lot of people returning to school, a lot of adult education, and I'm wondering what kind of support institution like yours need to retrain a growing adult population, be it at the community college level or at the career tech level, what you see the greatest areas of needs being there?
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I was trying to unmute. Thank you so very much. Yes, absolutely. It's important from our perspective that our students be provided those student support services. It's very critical. We recently conducted some research in the Kentucky Community and Technical College system to learn about what adult students really need in order to be successful. And one of the things that we found was that the online learning piece can be a part of the scenario, but it cannot be the only piece. That many adult learners felt that they needed that face-to-face component, and they needed services that would help support them to be successful. So tutoring assistance, advising assistance, those kinds of services are very, very important. One of the things that we did do was to look at how we're offering our courses. So pre-COVID, we started increasing the number of hybrid courses that we're offering. And that is that combination of the face-to-face component with the online, because while the adult student stated that they needed the face-to-face, they also shared about their busy lives. There was a desire to come back to school, to be retrained, to be reskilled, but they also had families and other responsibilities. And so we increased the number of hybrid courses where a student will come to class physically on Monday evening or late afternoon, and then on Wednesday, the assignment would be virtual or online. And so it was kind of the best of both worlds, if you will, to help them be as successful as possible. We also have moved our advising and tutorial services online. Now, COVID did help to push that even faster, but we had begun that pre-COVID. And so we have found that it's important for us to provide our students with the course mode that they need in order to be successful, but also with those support services as well.
Thank you, Dr. Young. I think you touched on something that is at the forefront of many people's in education and all different levels. The fundamental question is that it's not online versus in person, but perhaps it's finding the right balance of both, that hybrid model, and addressing the unique needs of our rural communities, our underserved communities, and especially places where we have a significantly higher number of first-generation college students that don't have any of that family support. And so for this next question, I'd like to, and I think everybody on this panel can answer pieces of this, but I'd like to turn to both Dr. Randall and Tamara for this, because I think there are many things that go hand in hand about addressing one of the challenges that Tamara, you lifted up, and that is the completion rate and the predatory nature of certain online institutions or other for-profit institutions, other things that often first-generation college students or marginalized communities and including tribal communities face. And that is, how do we set them up for success in the long term? Because we know one of the highest rates of default on student loan debt is from individuals who didn't complete the degree or program. So when we are thinking about this, I recently introduced a bill to provide TRIO programs, additional funding to meet the needs of these vulnerable populations during the pandemic. We know that TRIO is, I believe that TRIO is just such a fantastic program to help provide those supports that students who have family members and friends who are all going to college, they have some of those inherent structures around them that first generation and marginalized community students don't have. So the needs of those students are something that are particularly high in rural communities and in tribal communities. So what other investments do you think we need to make sure that first generation and low income students have to not only be prepared, but to finish, whether it's a technical degree or a 2-year or 4-year? How do we better set them up for success? Dr. Randall, I'll turn to you, and then Tamara, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Thank you for that. Some of the things that we look at, particularly for our demographic, we look at career training, career placement. Those are some really good areas that we need to focus on. We do have some, and I'm coming from a perspective of support from our tribal nation, from the Muskogee Creek Nation, and the College of the Muskogee Nation is a part of that. So, we have a great, wraparound service, for scholarships, for career training. And so, I feel like one thing that we can do to better serve our students is to provide more of that sort of career services, to connect our citizens, to connect our students, our graduates with those companies that are out there, with to provide them with hands-on training, maybe even look at reestablishing sort of the job placement committees, so that way we can really get into the needs of what are our constituents, what are they looking at, what are the companies that are out there, are our graduates, are they ready to come into the job and ready to, do they need additional training once we get them out there? So those are some of the things that we want to look at. Maybe some advisory boards with these companies. So to really get some inclusion from our stakeholders in the community. So I feel like, career services is going to be a big part of the direction that we're moving towards. So.
Thank you very much, Dr. Randall. Tamara?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add on to that too. I think another really important feature of this is also just better data for students and allowing there to be more transparency so that students from all over the country can make really informed decisions about the program or the institution that they're going to enter, to actually see if in the long term it will provide them the return on investment, especially knowing that college costs are increasing, and especially right now as more students are going to be turning to the post-secondary system to figure out how they're going to weather this recession, coming out of potentially losing a job, needing to reskill or upskill. Time and money are very precious entities, and so having better data around that. I know there are some really important bills right now, like the College Transparency Act, for example, that would lift sort of what's known as the ban on having student level data, so that we can actually see more information about students and their completion rates. There's a lot of efforts too, thinking through how do we even measure what return on investment and value is in higher education. It's not simple. It's not just that, oh, students at this school complete and then that means it's a good value. There's also a lot of post-enrollment data that matters. So looking at some of the earnings, for example, we know rural students, median earnings for rural students, even those with bachelor's and graduate degrees, still remain far below their urban and suburban counterparts. And so making sure that they understand what program area that they're going to go into, and making sure that's going to provide an ROI is important from the start. I'd also say that, it's really important, to your point, that we know that there are going to be predatory actors right now looking to take advantage of vulnerable students who want to reskill or upskill. So just making sure that we're putting in place as much oversight and accountability as possible, reinstating some of the regulations and things that have been overturned, providing protections for students, so that we can make sure we're not incentivizing or sort of giving free rein for these institutions to essentially get students Title IV federal financial aid dollars when they walk in the door, and then it doesn't really matter to some institutions if those students actually go on to complete or not. The last thing I'd say is that, I don't think more money to a problem is always the solution, but I definitely think when it comes to rural education and some of the challenges that many of us have already talked about, absolutely, to your point, more institutional aid and just more federal financial resources for rural students are critical. I think that we've already seen a lot of data show that emergency aid can be the make or break between a student re-enrolling over the summer, right? If they have a parking ticket that's putting a hold on their ability to come back, they may drop out, and once they've left the system, it becomes infinitely harder for them to come back in. And so a lot of institutions have put in place systems that say, you know what, we're just going to pay that $100, clear their record, so that that's not the barrier to coming back in. But I also think other things like allowing travel costs for rural students in particular, providing additional resources to schools to build out sort of cohort models so that rural students can enter together, find a cohort of other students so that they don't feel invisible or lost on large campuses. I think these are all efforts that more funding and investment, especially from the federal government, could play a really big role in actually having students not just start college, but actually finish.
Thank you both so much. There are so many challenges, and your points about oversight and transparency, Tamara, are incredibly important. And Dr. Randall, the need for career and technical training and advice, things that could be a speed bump for a student who is from a family that has a number of college educated members, are the last thing the first thing that might cause a first generation or low income student to just drop out and never be able to make it back. And when we're thinking about how we set people up for success, we have to consider those differences. And one of the things that I think we've touched on a little, each of you have touched on, is the need for a robust set of choices that have pathways that rural students can navigate. That the idea that it's only one model, 4-year higher education institutions, I think in some ways often pushes students to go into a setting when it may not be the best for them. They may not be ready, where apprenticeships, career techs, community colleges can provide potentially better settings for a lot of students. And it's not necessarily based on income or background, but aptitude and interest, which is someplace that we haven't put a lot of emphasis in our education system. So empowering that and helping students make the choices that are right for them, not just based on where they live, but empowering them. And you know, when we're thinking about what that means, taking from rural K-12 education and into higher education, one of the things that we're seeing is in so many places cutbacks on funding for especially rural education, K-12 education, consolidation of schools, as I mentioned early on. And I know that the Dr. Pratt, you have a lot of experience with this, and also Dr. Randall, you've spent time working with the Glenpool Public Schools Indian Education Parent Committee and other resources like that. And the challenge of those cuts means that it's often carved back to the very basic requirements of just what the basic boxes we can check. And I'd love for both Dr. Pratt and Dr. Randall to speak to what you think the impact is on rural schools and students when their education is carved back to those very basic requirements, and the difference that makes between them and urban students. Dr. Pratt, do you want to start this off?
Yeah, that's, you know, anytime you look at budget cuts or we look at recession numbers, and we know that coming out of COVID, we're probably going to look at budget issues probably 2 or 3 years out. We know we're dealing with hopefully another round of funding help pretty soon. But anytime in the rural communities, we already have kind of some issues and setbacks in certain areas. But one of the things I think that this is kind of established in our mindset in a lot of rural communities is the ability to be kind of more innovative and to understand that we don't have to stay in that same structure that we did prior to COVID, because we've proven that you can be hybrid, you can be semi face-to-face, you can do different learning models to address the needs. And with that flexibility, I think we can help our programs that help our offerings to rural students through virtual and or hybrid or some kind of blended approach. So I see it as there are definitely obviously issues when you look at anything to deal with funding cuts, but also finding the ability to adapt and kind of overcome. And I think it could be a better situation moving forward. when we know we're going to get more funding and receive more funding, but to show how we can be innovative and successful.
Thank you. Dr. Randall?
Yeah, some of the things that I've been seeing, is just that the importance of that engagement, with faculty, with staff, both through higher ed and K through 12. We're seeing a lot of that, students who are reaching out, faculty who are reaching out to the students and trying to engage with our students more. And so, of course, budget cuts, are a big issue. And, you really look at your resources and, and just as Dr. Pratt mentioned, adaptability, and so I feel like this is what we're seeing right now is bringing out that, I guess really just bringing out that need for that student engagement, for that community engagement, really, from our schools. So I've seen a lot of schools really step up, especially, in those rural communities who don't have a lot of the resources available, who don't have a lot of the, who struggle with that, that internet connectivity, who have to think outside of the box, who have to come up with some ideas on how are we going to engage, because that's been their strength, and that continues to be their strength. So I feel like this is, really a great time that we're seeing a lot of people come together and really, utilize that, that adaptability, that outside of the box thinking. So, we're seeing a lot of, what are some of the things that we're utilizing, of course, the, Zoom meetings and virtual meetings and things like that. And so how do we connect? How do we continue to connect with our students, with our communities? And so, what we're doing is, in our community, of course, I mentioned the strength of our Muskogee culture. And so, by providing students, with the resources that they need at home, and then, connecting online to walk them through different, cultural demonstrations, such as we're seeing a lot of these classes coming up, basket making, beadworking, moccasin making, just different things like that students can have the resources at home, and then we connect with them, through the internet to, continue that engagement. And I think that's a big part of it, is again, just that engagement. So, those, of course, the budget cuts have a big impact on that, on our ability to, to reach our students. But again, I feel like a lot of these schools are stepping up to that challenge.
Thank you very much. And I know we're getting close to the end of time, and I want to try to squeeze in one final question. I want to turn back to Dr. Young, because I think where you started, it ties so much of this together of what we've been discussing and the challenges of rural education, and that is the adjustments in the pandemic, the hybrid model, and the need to connect our rural K-12 as well as higher education and job opportunities, and what that looks like when things are cut back, of the ability for community colleges and career and technical institutions to work with our K-12, but also to adapt and adjust. And if you could just speak for a few moments about that intersection, Dr. Young, and any other place that Congress might be able to help facilitate that, any critical relief during COVID from your perspective.
Sure, thank you. From my perspective, partnerships are vital. It's important for the community college, for career and technical colleges to work very closely with our high school, our K-12 partners. That pipeline that we have been talking about is going to be critical for all of our successes. with COVID and having to move a great deal, at least initially, of our curriculum online and really even remote services, not just the classes, but all of our services online, also showed us where we had a real need, particularly in the rural area, for internet access. It was very simple for me to say, okay, we are moving completely online. But then I had to be reminded that many of our students do not have internet access, and many of our students did not even have computers with which to access those courses online. And so we had to back up and begin to think about what resources do we have that we could use to provide our students with just the very basic tools that they need. I will say that the CARES dollars helped us tremendously in being able to do that at this point moving forward. So continued support in that way is going to be critical, I believe, for those of us, particularly in rural areas, because if our students do not have the tools necessary for success, then that's truly going to hinder them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Young, and thank you to our amazing panel. I could talk to you so much longer. Unfortunately, we only have an hour today. We won't be able to solve everything, but your perspectives have been incredibly valuable, because in moving forward, creating jobs and economic opportunity, addressing our education issues in a thoughtful way, in a holistic way that doesn't move to extremes, that recognizes the different opportunities, needs, challenges, and benefits that exist in rural communities is a critical piece of the puzzle. So thank you all for joining us today for this conversation in our Blue Dog series, and for all of your expertise and insight, and for all that you do to serve your communities and to take care of what I consider one of our best investments, that is in education. Because it's a cornerstone, really, of our communities. And if we want rural America to succeed and prosper, we have to make strong investments in our education infrastructure. And that is good for all of us, rural and urban. And as an ongoing conversation, I look forward to working with Blue Dog Coalition, continuing to work with them and experts such as yourselves to get that common sense, bipartisan, practical reform through that takes care of all of our communities. So once again, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for your insights and your work. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the very near future.
Thank you.
Thank you.